Here we go. Okay, recording is live, and we are on Yud Aleph Amid Aleph. We are on 11a. If we have enough time at the end of tonight, I actually have an interesting question related to the Gemara from our good friend Rav Zilberstein in Chashuke Chemed. It's a classic question about if someone is a leper, meaning someone has an infectious disease, and they are quarantined in a some sort of ward or a hospital. So can you send them tefillin? But we know that down the line, the tefillin will have to be destroyed in some kind of way, lest someone contract the virus from the tefillin itself. So the question is, are you allowed to give someone a tefillin for a short-term mitzvah? Or are you not allowed to put the tefillin in such a situation that would require you to destroy it later? And we're going to talk about different methods for destroying it. And you know what? Let's pay attention during the Gemara and see where you might think that connection to that question comes up, okay? So something to pay attention to throughout. Where could this question possibly come from in the Gemara? Where is Rav Zilberstein's springboard? I'll give you a hint. It's going to be in the latter half, so you'll have to hold cup until then. Okay, so we are toward the top of Yud Aleph Amid Aleph, toward the top of 11a. Actually, if you see the parentheses over here, there's a little bit of a few abbreviations, a mnemonic that I think some of the commentaries don't even know what the mnemonic means. So if they don't know, I definitely don't know. And we're really picking up from what we said last time. If we remember at the end of last time, we said that God spoke to Yoshua. He used the lashon of daber instead of omer. And we said the word daber, when it says vayedaber Hashem al Yeshua lemor, dibor is a lashon kasha. It's a firmer form of speaking, firm or harsh depending on the context. So why did God speak firmly to Yoshua when commanding him the laws of the Arei Miklat? So please give a Rabbi Yehuda Rabbanan. It's a machlokes, a dispute between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbanan. One is because God was speaking actually like firmly, almost in a rebuking, a chastising manner, because Yoshua was in the land of Israel. And okay, let's go. Set up the Arei Miklat already. What are you waiting for? So God was saying to Yoshua, he was speaking firmly, build the Arei Miklat already. Do not delay it any longer. And that's why the pasuk departs from the usual language of Vayomer instead of Vaydaber instead of Vayomer. But the other opinion is what we learned last time. Why did Hashem use a stronger form of language here? Because God was commanding him to upkeep a Torah law as opposed to something new during the times of the prophets. So Torah laws, of course, require a stronger use of language because the words of the Torah, while the words of the prophets are important, the commands of the Torah are directly from God, and obviously they take precedence over everything else. So that's that little piece over there. And because of this, we have a few different homiletics or hermeneutics when it comes to Yehoshua. So this isn't particularly related to the cities of refuge anymore, but because we started talking about the cities of refuge and Yehoshua, we're going to talk a little bit more about Yehoshua's career. So something we dealt with in our Chumash class on Sunday mornings is we had a question about who wrote the last psukim in the Torah, who wrote the last verses in the Torah. And we quoted a Gemara, which is a machlokes. You see, the issue is the last psukim in the Torah declare that Moshe died. So how is it possible that Moshe Rabbeinu can write about his own death if it didn't happen yet? So one opinion is actually his student Yoshua, his student Joshua, finished the last 8 psukim of the Torah. And according to Ibn Ezra, I think it was the whole entire last parak, not just the last 8. Whereas according to the other opinion of the Gemara, Moshe Rabbeinu, he wrote the last few psukim in the Torah in tears. He wrote the last few psukim weeping because he knew that his destiny was sealed and he wouldn't be entering the land of Israel. So this Gemara is going to follow the first interpretation. So when it says in the pasuk in Sefer Yoshua, "Vayichtov Yoshua es advarim ha'ela b'Sefer Toras Elokim," that Yoshua is going to write these words, these matters in the Sefer, in the book of God. There is a dispute as to what that verse means. What is Yoshua writing and in what book? One opinion is this refers to Yoshua completing the final verses in the Torah that Moshe Rabbeinu wasn't able to do himself. Whereas, Bechad Omer Are Miklat. The other opinion, okay, we do bring back an Are Miklat, is that he was writing down the verses of Are Miklat, about the cities of refuge. So the Gemara says one of these interpretations makes sense, the other one not as much. I understand the first opinion that this verse in Yoshua, that it says, and he wrote in the book of God, it refers to him actually completing the words of the book of God. That fits in the wording really nicely. As it says, he wrote in the book of God. But if we say this is referring to the cities of refuge that he wrote down, didn't Moshe Rabbeinu already write that down? So what could it be referring to, this verse, if it's talking about the Arei Miklat? Yoshua had his own book, right? Yeah, his own book, Yoshua. And so in there, he wrote about the Arei Miklat, but not in the book of God, not in the Torah. So those are two different ways to understand that.
Question.
And yes.
On the side, it says this is in Perek Chaf Daled.
Perek Chaf Daled.
Isn't that pretty well into his arrival? I mean, it's why would be such a delay?
You're talking about Chaf Daled and Yoshua.
Right.
We're really up. I need to look back in the context. I mean, Chaf Daled is 24 chapters in.
Yeah.
It's not the beginning of the book.
It's not. I would think it would be more towards the beginning.
Well, this would support the opinion that says that he delayed setting up the Arei Miklat, and therefore God had to give him some motivation to do it. I think what you're saying actually supports that opinion, that if it's in Perek Chaf Daled.
Okay.
Yeah, so very good. That's a great supporting observation. So now that we're talking about Sifrei Torah, why don't we bring in this random halachic machlokis over here right before we get to the Mishnah. Sefer shetafru b'pishtan. So our Sifrei Torah, they are written on cloth. They are has to be written on parchment that comes from a kosher animal. But you know how do we connect the parchment together? We sew it in. Does anyone know what we sew it with? We use what?
Gauze.
Right, so the sinews from the animal.
Yeah.
Exactly. So that's how we write them. But the question comes up in the Gemara is, Sefer shetafru b'pishtan, let's say used linen, you used flax instead. Would that suffice? Would that be a kosher Sefer Torah? So again, it adds everything. It is subject to a dispute. Pligi bar Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Meir. Chad omer kasher. One opinion says that's kasher, v'chad omer pasel. Okay, shkayach, what's the basis of their dispute? Lemad omar pasel dichsiv. According to the opinion that disqualifies such a Sefer Torah that is sewn with linen, flax, instead of sinews, it's because it says in the Torah, dichsiv, lemad tia Torah Hashem beficha. The iskish kol haTorah kula litfilin. Ma tefillin halach l'Moshe Sinai l'tov from beginin. Afkol l'tov from beginning. So this is a very important, if there's one, I don't want to say one thing you walk away. There's actually a few important things we're going to talk about tonight. So I can't it'd be disingenuous if I said it, but a very important concept that you want to remember from tonight is that there is a hekesh, a halachic hermeneutical connection between tefillin and all the other mitzvos in the Torah. For instance, if I'm not mistaken, the fact that we know that women are exempt from other time-bound mitzvos is because we know they're exempt from tefillin, and we extrapolate from that to all other mitzvos that are similar to tefillin, which are time-bound. So tefillin is used as a halachic paradigm for other areas of the Torah. Now, where do we see that in the verse? because it says in the verse, Lamatia Torahs Hashem beficha. It mentions Torahs Hashem. So we see this connection between tefillin and the rest of Torahs Hashem. So, okay, if tefillin needs to be sewn with sinews, you can't sew tefillin with linen, then I have a hekish, a connection to the rest of the Torah. A Sefer Torah itself should also have to be written with gidin, with sinews, and not with linen. That seems to be a very compelling pshat. However, the Idach, what about the opinion that somehow finds a way to permit sewing a Torah with linen, right? I imagine it'd be a little bit cheaper to make a Sefer Torah that way. I don't know cost, but I imagine linen's a little bit more commonplace than getting sinews from an animal and sewing that in. So the Idach, he iskish lemuter beficha, leilchosav lo iskish. So the second opinion that says that a Torah that's sewn with linen is still kosher, it's because when we use tefillin as a halachic paradigm to other areas of the Torah, it's a little bit more limited in scope. It's not a free-range paradigm that tells us everything, because it says in the pasuk, it uses the words lemuter beficha, for that which is permissible for you to eat. Well, I know that cloth has to be made out of an animal. Lemuter beficha, that which is permissible in your mouth, comes to tell me for tefillin that when you have to make something out of an animal, it has to be made out of a kosher animal. So I know that Torah, which has to be made out of cloth, has to be made out of cloth from a kosher animal. But since there's nothing telling me per se that a Torah must be sewn with material from animals, I don't need to derive anything from tefillin. Once I know it has to be made from animals, it has to be made from kosher animals like tefillin. But otherwise, if there's no reason to assume something has to be made from an animal, then we don't activate the verse that says it has to be from a kosher animal if it doesn't need to be made from an animal to begin with. We don't have that indication. So the other opinion says tefillin has to be sewn with gidin, with sinew, whereas a Sefer Torah actually could be sewn with linen. As Arthur pointed out, I do not believe that is how we paskin. I have yet to see a Sefer Torah that's sewn with linen. And again, I haven't been looking really carefully and checking what material it was, but it didn't strike me as such. But you'll let me know if you ever see a Sefer Torah with linen. I'd be interested if anyone follows this. Anyway, one last thing right before we get to the Mishnah, and then we'll pause for any questions. Amarav chazilhu litfilin. When I first read the Gemara, I misread it. I didn't realize it said tefillin actually, and it happens to be your Gemaras might have it. There is a girsa over here which changes the word tefillin with Sefer Torah, because tefillin, it seems indisputable that tefillin cannot be sewn with linen. But here we have an opinion that says, Amarav chazilhu litfilin devei chabibi detavri bechitna v'lei. I saw that my uncle's tefillin were actually sewn with linen. But no, the halakha is not in accordance with him. So if you look at the side, let's see, what was it? It was number aleph. So they changed the word letfilin to lesifre, meaning to sifrei Torah. So that's an important change, because then it maintains that everybody holds that tefillin must be sewn with sinews, not with linen. Okay. Nice little halachic tidbit right in there in the middle of these Gemaras. Let's just pause for a moment. We are at the Mishnah, so good progress. Any clarification questions that I can address at this point? Anything from the Gemara that appeared a little bit unclear that we can smooth out? Okay, glad this is smooth sailing so far. So this Mishnah, a lot of the Mishnayos and Makkos are famous for different reasons. This one is a very notable Mishnah and has broader theological ideas in there, as well as we'll see in the Gemara. Okay. So we've talked about the Ari Miklat for a while now. We've talked about what makes a person get exiled to the Ari Miklat. But we never talked about how long someone needs to spend in the Ir Miklat. The way we made it sound until now, perhaps, is that it's a life sentence. And it does have the potential to be a life sentence. But actually, the time limit is that when the Kohen Gadol dies, when the high priest dies, then that's when the people who are in the Ari Miklat, because they were exiled, they're now allowed to leave the Ir Miklat. So the question is, though, there wasn't just one kind of Kohen Gadol. There were a few different kind of Kohanim Gedolim. And welcome Zadie. You know, this is you're on just in time to hear about the Kohanim, right? So we summoned you on. There is one kind of Kohen that back in the earlier First Temple period, when we still had the oil, the special oil for anointing Kohanim, they would anoint them as such. The Echad Hamaruba Bibegadim. But then once we lost that special anointing oil, we basically just made someone a Kohen Gadol by virtue of giving them the extra garments, the extra vestments that a Kohen Gadol wears. I never heard the word vestments used, by the way. I've only seen an Art Scroll translation for the Kohen Gadol's garments, but apparently that's a word. From what I remember, I'm not sure if in the Art Scroll Gemara it translates it as such, but I think in the Chumash it did. Well, so the Echad Sha'afar Mishichuso. So this is going to be good for the people who are for our group, people who are learning Yoma Mishnayos. Actually, this is a very good connection. So remember how they talked about having a substitute Kohen Gadol for certain instances if the Kohen Gadol became invalid. So this is kind of that idea here where there be a substitute Kohen Gadol if something happened to the regular Kohen Gadol. So, but once once the regular Kohen Gadol comes back to his job and the substitute leaves, he still has a residual Kohen Gadol status to the extent that if he dies, he also enables all of the rotzchim, all of the accidental murderers in Ari Miklat, he enables them to leave the Ir Miklat. So all of these kind of Kohanim Gedolim, these three, Machzir and Eserotzeach, their death results in the freedom of these rotzchim, of the accidental killers, to leave and to not worry about the Golei Hadam having the right to kill them anymore. Now, does that mean the Golei Hadam won't try to kill him anyway? I mean, they could still do it, but the law would not be on their side. They would not be absolved, and that's a huge deterrent. Okay. And Rabbi Yehuda adds on one more kind of Kohen Gadol, a fourth one. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Af Mashuach Milchama Maser Sorotzeach. There was a special Kohen. He was like the top chaplain of the military. So the Kohen that was anointed to serve as the chief rabbi of the military, as the top chaplain, he also has that kind of status of a Kohen Gadol of sorts. Again, that if he dies, it frees all of the people who are in the Ir Miklat. Lefikach, and because of this really interesting condition to freedom, Imosein Shel Kohanim Misafkos Lehem Michya Kusus, the mothers of the Kohanim Gedolim would provide food, would provide clothing for the people living in the Ir Miklat, so that they do not pray for their sons to die. Because you can imagine, if you are in a prison sentence that's potentially a lifelong prison sentence, and you are there your entire life, and you know the one way you're going to get out of jail is for this Kohen Gadol to die, chances are every morning you're davening Tachanun, you're davening Shemona Esrei, your goal is to pray to God for this Kohen Gadol to die so that you can go free. So the mothers of these Kohanim Gedolim, naturally, were very concerned for their sons. So it sounds like they would basically try to bribe the people and say, he's not a bad guy, don't pray for him to die, it's okay, here's some free food. We do anything for free food, right? People come to all sorts of places when you offer them free food. So, she figured I could bribe them with free food. They won't pray for my son to die. What was that, Toby? What was that?
I said even shul.
Yes, even shul. That was my
even shul.
Yes, even shul. That was our subtle plug for the Kiddush. Thank you. Yes, Veldadi Sush Kiddush at shul on Shabbos. I know this group already. We're already here for learning and for Torah, so they don't need the Kiddush, but always good to know that there's extra stuff. Okay. All right. Now let's. the Gemara is going to elaborate on this because it's a really weird idea that we're going to pray for him to die and he's going to die because of my prayer. I mean, this is actually a fascinating idea, which is a little bit beyond the scope of what we're doing tonight. Rav Moshe Feinstein was asked a shaila, which is basically it's a very daunting medical ethics question, where someone is kind of like at the end of their life, maybe at hospice, and the question is, can someone pray? Now, you're not allowed to actively euthanize somebody, but can someone pray for someone to die to relieve them of the pain that they are in? So there's a whole Gemara, I think, where it was Rebbe who was going to die, and his maid did something. She made a noise to stop the Bachrim from praying. They were praying to keep him alive. She similar to Gemara that we learned with the Malach HaMavis. Remember, at an angel of death, he distracted him from the rabbi from learning, and then he was able to then take his soul. So a similar idea, the yeshiva Bachrim, they were praying for their Rebbe to stay alive, and then the maid of this Rebbe saw that he was in great pain, and the only thing stopping his soul from ascending on high were their prayers, which were, pushing his soul into his body, if you were to think about it metaphysically. And so she created some sort of distraction to stop them from praying, and that's when his soul departed. So the question is, Rav Moshe Feinstein, and by the way, this is a future Monday night class I already have prepared and docketed, so which is why we're not going to elaborate on here too much. Rav Moshe Feinstein used that Gemara as the basis for permitting someone to pray for God to relieve someone of their pain by taking their soul. So how's that relevant here? Well, it's interesting. Here we have people praying for the Kohen Gadol to die. If someone prays for someone to die, is that effective? So let's go into the Gemara. The Gemara is not going to immediately address that question, but if we hold on for a moment, after we're done addressing the first part of the Mishnah, the second part of the Mishnah will be addressed by the Gemara, which deals with this question. Okay, here we go. Minahani Mili. Where do we know that these three Kohanim allow someone to leave the Ir Miklat once he dies? Amar Rav Kahana, the Amar Kra. Vayashav ba Amos HaKohen HaGadol. Because verse number 1 says he'll remain there until the Kohen Gadol dies. Uksiv, pasuk number 2. Ki be'ir miklato yashav Amos HaKohen Gadol. Pasuk number 3. Uksiv v'achrei Mos HaKohen Gadol. We have 3 mentionings in the Torah, 3 mentionings of when the Kohen Gadol dies, the guy who went to the Ir Miklat gets to go free. Why does the Torah need to say 3 times? To tell me that there are 3 types of Kohanim Gedolim which will free a person from the Ir Miklat. Rabbi Yehuda, what about Rabbi Yehuda who says that the chief of the IDF, right, the head Kohen Gadol chaplain of the army, that if he dies, it also counts. Ksiv Krach Rina, he has a 4th verse, Lashuv Lashevis Be'eretz Ad Mos HaKohen. Now, if he has a 4th verse which says he'll remain there until the death of the Kohen Gadol, why don't the Rabbanan, why is it a Tana Kama in the Mishnah, also acknowledge there's a 4th kind of Kohen Gadol? So Ve'idach Midlo Ksiv HaGadol. It doesn't say the word HaGadol in that 4th verse, just as a plain old Kohen. It's a Chame Hanachu. We just assume that verse is referring to one of the other 3 categories. Okay, so those are derivations from the verse. Nothing, no rocket science in that line over there. Now, I mean, of course, all Gemara is interesting, but this is a particularly notable Gemara that you will want to remember and you want to walk away with. If you meet someone on the street and they ask you, "Oh, are you learning Makkos?" and you tell them that you're in the 2nd chapter of Makkos, this is one of the things that they may ask you about, because this is a very iconic Gemara here. Okay.
Let me ask you a question.
Yes.
Why would anybody want to be a Kohen Gadol and have to worry about people praying for his death?
Right, exactly. Why would someone want to be a Kohen Gadol? So in general, the principle is with high reward comes high risk. It's the same idea. Why would someone want to be Jewish and keep 613 mitzvos? On the one hand, it's 613 opportunities, but also it's 613 risks of not fulfilling those opportunities and the consequences that come from there. So becoming a Kohen, you know what? Let's lahavdil afi avdelos. Let's talk about someone who wants to achieve a political position. So on the one hand, if I become the president of the United States or become the mayor of New York City, so on the one hand, it could be very rewarding. I could impact policy and improve the lives of many people, hopefully. But on the other hand, that means I'm under higher scrutiny. And it means that, people who wouldn't be coming after me would start coming after me by virtue of me being in that position. So the Kohen Gadol works a similar way. Now, on the one hand, there's a lot of opportunity to provide and guide the Jewish people and intercede on their behalf to God. On the other hand, it comes with a high risk as well. That's how life works usually. So the other answer is, during the Second Temple era, people bought off the position. People do all sorts of crazy things to be in the spotlight. So it's part of the human condition. Okay. Taima delo matzlu. It sounds like from the Mishnah that the reason, okay. So taima delo matzlu. Why does the Kohen Gadol not die? Because if they don't pray that he'll die, he won't die. Hamatzlu maisi. Wait, so is the implication from the Mishnah that if they did pray for the Kohen Gadol is going to die because of their prayers? V'agsiv kitzibur lanur kidror laov kin kilas chinam lo savo. It says in the verse that a baseless curse doesn't have an effect on anyone. If I curse somebody, just because I curse them doesn't mean that it's going to come true. So just because these people are praying and cursing that the Kohen Gadol should die, who said he's deserving of it? If he's not deserving of death, their curses are not going to do anything. Their prayers won't do anything to him. So maybe the Kohen Gadol did do something that if they pray for his demise, they'll bring it about. There's an elderly gentleman who is sitting in on this discussion, and he says, listen, you youngsters, back in the day when I was sitting in Rava's shir, the great Rebbe Rava said as follows. He answered your question. Because the Kohen Gadol should have been praying, should have been interceding on the behalf of his generation. And had he prayed more, had he done more and beseeched God more, there would have been less of these kind of murders, less of these kind of accidental killings that would have taken place. And because the Kohen Gadol did not beseech God enough to prevent these things from taking about, therefore, if these people pray that he should die as a result, God's going to say, well, let's see if they make a good point. It looks like they only wound up there because this guy didn't pray enough to prevent such unfortunate circumstances. You know what, guys? You make a compelling point. Mr. Kohen Gadol, I think it's time for you to go. That was my gross oversimplification of how it goes. I'm sure God's thing is far more complex than that, but hopefully that helps. So a very fascinating idea that the Kohen Gadol, because he did not pray for them, he dies because he didn't do enough for them.
Let me ask you a question. Since we all have free will, how can the Kohen Gadol praying for the people of Israel eliminate, or cause Hashem to eliminate all the free will that results in accidental deaths, which result from negligence?
So that's a great question, Zadie. So my grandfather is asking, which is, if we all have free will, how does the Kohen Gadol's prayer is going to change anything? So that's why, if we notice, it doesn't say how the Kohen Gadol prayed more, there would be less deliberate murders. There'd be less killing b'mezid. But it says there'll be less accidental murders. Yes, I have the free will to check my axe and make sure that the hilt is tightened in well, but if I didn't do that, there are two things that could happen. When I swing, the hilt could just hit something else. It doesn't have to hit the next lumberjack, or I could accidentally hit the next lumberjack. And where the prayer comes in, where God comes in, is God will often cause, we believe, a subtle change in things, but not an overt change in nature. So God could have shifted the trajectory of that axe head so it wouldn't hit the guy, so this guy wouldn't wind up in Gullus. But since the Kohen Gadol didn't pray enough to protect these people, unfortunately, that occurred. But it's fascinating. There's I don't want to understate how much theological, philosophical significance there is that you're saying it's because the Kohen Gadol didn't pray that this happened. He could have prevented it. So I guess, one thing you could walk away with is understanding the depth and power of prayer. That's, I think rabbis like giving classes on that all the time. That's not exactly my forte, but I guess I'm becoming that person tonight. So there's your inspiration for the power of prayer, coming from a very morbid source, though. But there's another version of how this discussion went down, a different version of how they understood the Mishnah. The Ika the Masni, there are those who understand the Mishnah as follows: that she didn't bring the food to stop them from praying. She brought them food and brought them sustenance, so that they would pray that the Kohen Gadol would not die. So that's a much more positive take. She's not bribing them to stop them from praying. Rather, she's bribing. When you think about it, why would I want to bribe someone not to pray to God? Rather, she's encouraging them to pray for the welfare of the Kohen Gadol. Time of the Matzlu. The implication is that if they pray, the Kohen will remain alive. Hello, Matzlu Maisi. What? If they don't pray for the Kohen Gadol, the Kohen Gadol is going to die. So, my Havalei Lamebad. What did the Kohen Gadol do wrong? So, Hachamrina Tuvia Chata V'Zigud Mangid. So there was a saying back in, I think in Jerusalem. They would say, so Tuvia sins and Zigud's a name, and Zigud gets lashes because Tuvia sinned. Or Hasamami, there they said, Shechem Nasiv, Shechem gets married, like Shechem in the Torah and Sefer Bereshis. Umavgai Gazir, what? And a guy by the name of Magvai, a random guy in the village, needs to circumcise himself now because of Shechem wanting to get married to Dinah. So it's an expression that they had back then, which is why? Because Reuven sins, Shimon has to suffer for Reuven's sin. I like that, by the way, how that was an ancient saying back then. Shechem wants to get married, so what's his name? Bagai, whatever you pronounce it. In a guy in the town has to get circumcised because of Shechem. I always thought about that when we're going through the parsha. I'm like, this is like really unfair for all the villagers there. Like they couldn't care less if Shechem gets married to Dinah or not. Who cares? And like they all have to circumcise themselves because this guy wants to get married to this girl. So it's apparently it was such a lack of justice, not just for Dinah, but for all the villagers, that it became an expression as well. But the idea here is which is what? Because this person killed B'shogeg, now the Kohen Gadol has to die because of that. So we'll just wrap up this piece and I'll take the question, Phyllis. So this elderly gentleman who remembers the days of yore when he was sitting in Shir with Rava. So Rava said, I taught me back then, because the Kohen Gadol could have interceded and prayed to God, prevent such terrible circumstance from coming about. But he decided to get involved in other matters that Kohanim Gedolim do, which is, I guess they do sacrifice every now and then. Maybe he went on too many speaking tours and, did too many other things. I'm not really sure. Went golfing too much with his, whatever he was doing. So, but he wasn't spending time caring for the constituency. So therefore, he's held accountable. Good muster for rabbis, I guess. So there's a story that Rabbi Shua ben Levi. So Rabbi Shua ben Levi, you look throughout the Gemara, Eliyahu Hanavi always comes to hang out with Rabbi Shua ben Levi. For some reason, Rabbi Shua ben Levi, Eliyahu Hanavi, Elijah the prophet, he loved hanging out with him. He'd show up all the time. You hear these stories about them together in rabbinic literature. And so when someone was killed and consumed by a lion near where Rabbi Shua ben Levi lived, Eliyahu would not visit him for 3 days. He would not visit him for 3 days. Why? Because the same idea here, if Rabbi Shua ben Levi was really praying and really spiritually caring for the needs of the people in his surrounding vicinity, such a terrible calamity would never have occurred. And so Eliyahu did not visit for 3 days to protest the fact that he was not caring enough for his constituents. He was hanging out too much with his Eliyahu Navi. He was going on too many trips with him. He was hanging out too much with going to many rabbi conventions. He didn't spend enough time caring for the constituents, so therefore he was held accountable. Okay, let me pause. Phyllis, you had a question.
It wasn't a question. You mentioned Dinah and the fact that Shechem wanted everybody circumcised, but then he killed them all.
It wasn't Shechem who killed them all. It was Shimon and Levi.
Well, and in any case, I thought it was Shechem.
Nope, Shimon and Levi killed out the city, and that's why Yaakov chastises Shimon and Levi, saying, and then he says, your craft is with the sword. You're going to get us all killed. People are going to gang up on us. That's what happens.
Okay.
But okay, good to bring that up. Let's just go further in the Gemara. We have another fascinating Agadata coming up. Also something which is a rather iconic piece of Gemara. And then we'll get to the Zilberstein question. Keep an eye out. Remember, the question for Zilberstein is that if someone has a contagious disease and they're going to be living for a short time and you want to give them tefillin, are you allowed to give them tefillin, but knowing that after they're done with the tefillin, you'll have to destroy them so that no one else gets infected with the disease that is now on the tefillin? Are you allowed to put tefillin in a position like that where they'll need to be destroyed in the long term for a short-term mitzvah? So you'll see in the following Gemara where the springboard for that is. Amar Yehuda Marav, Kilas Chacham Afil B'Chinam Hiba. The curse of a Talmud Chacham, of a great sage, comes true even if it is somewhat baseless, even if the condition for it isn't met. This is not brought up in the Gemara, by the way, this one, not in this Gemara at least, but a classic example of that was with Yaakov Avinu. Yaakov cursed when Lavan caught up. He said, "Where are my truffim? Where are my idols?" Every time I read that pasuk, by the way, I always think of like truffles. It's like I always like to reimagine he was like running after chocolate truffles. That's how I read it anyway. Okay, for whatever it's worth, not much. But what happened was Yaakov said he cursed whoever was in possession of the truffim, which happened to be Rachel, who stole from her father. Now Yaakov, he would never want to curse Rachel, but he made a curse anyway. So because of that, Rachel died along the way because that curse came true. Which does anyone? We don't have any Star Wars fans here, do we?
There's an opposite explanation for why Rachel died, because in Israel, you're not allowed to be married to two sisters at the same time.
Yes.
And she was the second one that he married. And so when they went into Israel, she had to die.
I just had deja vu. I feel like either in Makkos or in a Monday night shir, we brought this up and you reminded me of that. So I just had deja vu. But it's good to do chazara on that.
Not fair.
What?
It's not fair.
Okay. All right, hard to assess these things.
Are you making the distinction between two wives and a wife and Abraham had Hagar?
Well, yeah, I'm not getting into. Well, there's a difference with the concubine. Also,
that's what I'm asking.
The issue was there were two sisters. He was married two sisters.
Okay.
That was the issue. Not having multiple wives, polygamy was mutter then. Maybe not advisable, as we see from stories in the Torah, but it was mutter at least. Okay. So anyway, for what it's worth, people who watch Revenge of the Sith in Star Wars, at the end, it's not spoilers because you would have, if you care to watch, you would have watched it many years ago already. That when Darth Vader at the end of the movie, he asks where his wife Padme is, and then Darth Sidious says, "It appears that in your anger you killed her." So I always saw that as like when Yaakov cursed Rachel, he didn't mean to do it, but in his anger he cursed, and it wound up killing Rachel. So you'll watch that scene at the end of Star Wars now. You'll think of that Gemara, and there's your Torah Mata for the evening. Torah movies. Okay, we got a little more ground to cover. Where do we learn from this? Where do we see this in the Tanakh? Achitophel. Who was Achitophel? Achitophel was an advisor and teacher of David HaMelech, King David, but then he defected to advise Avshalom, his son, who rebelled against him in a failed coup. So Achitophel, when he was still the advisor of David HaMelech, Shabashah Shekara David Shisin, Kafet Tahoma, Bala Mishtafa La Alma. So when he was digging the foundations for the temple to get it ready, he wasn't going to make the temple, we know that Shlomo HaMelech had to do it. But rather, so when he dug the foundations, the water from the deep began to rise, and it threatened to flood all the surrounding lands. Don't ask me how that works in terms of earth science. It wasn't really covered in my 8th grade earth science course, but apparently that was a thing. So Amar Mahu Lichto Shem Achasvo Misha Betoma Deleko Aduchte. Am I allowed to write a special name of God on a piece of a shard cast into the water so that the divine properties of this name of God would keep the water in place? Apparently, they had all sorts of cool magic back then that we're not really privy to today. So he asked, am I allowed to do that? Because the issue is the name of God will be erased in the process. The water will wash away the name of God eventually from that shard. So Leked Amar Le Midi, none of his advisors took a position on it, and David HaMelech got frustrated. So Amar, anyone who knows an answer to this and doesn't give me an answer, they should be hanged by their throat.
Triangle.
So the Ritva points out that Achitophel, he was being a little bit lazy. You know, this kind of harkens back to Yeshua before. He was taking his time. He really could have come up with a good idea earlier, but he didn't want to. So the curse is going to come true for him. So Banasa Achitophel Kal V'chomer Ba'atzo. Achitophel made a Kal V'chomer. He took out his thumb. Amar Umal Aso Shalom Bein Ish Le'ishto Amar Torah Shemishnut Avudusha Yimichal Amayim. We know that during the Sota ritual, if there is a woman who was warned not to be secluded with this man, and she doesn't listen, she secludes herself with this man, and we have good reason to think that she committed adultery. We have good circumstantial evidence now, and she was warned not to, and she did it anyway. But we don't have 100% proof that she committed adultery. She undergoes a Sota ritual.
Mm-hmm.
Part of that ritual is erasing the name of God into this water. She drinks the water, and if she did not commit adultery, she's blessed with children. And if she did commit adultery, she kind of just, the way I was always told as a kid, was she inflates and then she pops. That's not exactly how it's described. It's more like her innards begin to collapse from the inside. But anyone who saw, what was it, I forgot, it was the second or the third Harry Potter movie where the ant kind of blows up. I don't know, maybe Jenny, maybe you got that reference. So that's basically how I always imagined the Sota. Okay. So what happened was he said, if we could erase the name of God for the sake of this man and woman's relationship, certainly for the sake of the entire world, we would be allowed to erase the name of God if it meant saving the world. So again, I don't fully understand the Metzias, the facts on the ground, but apparently the water coming up from foundations threatened to wipe out the entire world, or at least the whole surrounding area. So to save all those lives, they were able to put the name of God on a shard, throw it into the water there, even though it would eventually erase the name of God. So Amar Le, Achitophel told David, Shari, it's permissible to do this. So it worked, the water stopped, everyone was saved. Even still, after Achitophel's advice was not accepted by Avshalom, Achitophel went home, he gave his last will and testament to his family, and he hanged himself. So we see that David HaMelech's curse came true. Now, by the way, it's fascinating. I actually have a question. I haven't, not to say I did extensive research, but I haven't seen it addressed. I'll just share the question and then move on, this gets back to the free will question that we had before that I think Zadie, you brought up, which is, it's one thing for David to curse him, and then, he gets hanged, he's riding his horse, and then all of a sudden the rope comes and hangs him. But here he chose to hang himself. So it's interesting that David could curse him, and then he would, by his own volition, choose to hang himself, which seems to be a lack of free will almost. I had that question when going through it. So I don't have a good answer, but I'm just putting down your radar. We only have 10 minutes left, so maybe if we have time at the end, I'll take some of your answers if you have any. Okay, very similar idea right now. When it comes to a curse of a Torah scholar, even if he makes it on condition and the condition is not fulfilled, meaning the person should not be cursed, the curse comes true to a certain extent. Where do we know this from? Minalad, where do we know this from? Me'eli. So, okay, we're learning a lot of Tanakh tonight. All right, we got to remember all of our Nevi'im Rishonim here. So when we talk about Eli, Eli was the Kohen Gadol at the beginning of Sefer Shmuel. He took Shmuel under his tutelage. But when Eli was asking him about his prophecy, Eli said to Kamar le Eli le Shmuel, God should curse you if you hide this matter from me. Even though even though Shmuel did comply, the curse still came true to a certain extent. That Shmuel's sons, they had rabbi son syndrome, and they went off the derech, they didn't follow in his paths. So why did he have that? Because Eli's sons also had rabbi son syndrome. That's what they called it when I grew up in the yeshivish world, that you see like all these from rabbis, but then their kids don't follow in their ways. I'll editorialize another time when we have more time about that for that. But that's what happened with Eli. And Eli was basically, Rashi points out, Eli was cursing Shmuel that Shmuel should have the same circumstance as him. And unfortunately, it did come true for Shmuel. One last example, and this might be, other than the Rachel example, this might be the most famous example of where someone makes a curse of sorts on a condition, and even though the condition isn't met, he shouldn't be cursed, it comes true nonetheless. And that is with Yehuda. Remember Yehuda? He has to convince Yaakov to let him take Binyamin down to Egypt. And if he says, Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amarav, Nidoy al Tanai, we just turned the page, Yud Alpha Beis, 11b. A Nidoy al Tanai, if someone puts themselves into a form of excommunication on a condition, Sarech Hafara, it needs to be annulled. Someone needs to annul it. Minolan, Yehuda Dechsiv, Im Lo Avi Yosef Elecha. Yehuda, the rabbis understand that not only was he cursing himself in this world, but he was claiming that he stipulated that if he does not bring Binyamin back from Egypt, then he will be kept from the world to come as well. Now, even though he's sort of successful, see, he doesn't actually bring, the Mefarshim point out, he doesn't actually bring Binyamin back, but he does make sure that Binyamin's safe. So he sort of fulfilled the condition, but didn't fully fulfill the condition, so he got punished to a certain extent. The Nidoy came true. Rav Shmuel Bar Nachmani Rav Yonasan, it says in the verse, and Reuven shall live and not die, and then etc. Yehuda, and this is for Yehuda. What is the verse referring to? Kol osan mem shana shahay Yisrael b'midbar, for all 40 years that the Jewish people were traveling through the desert. Atzmos of Shal Yehuda hayimugugalim ba'aron. The bones of Yehuda were never at rest. They were, the expression that his bones are rolling in his grave? Literally, over here, his bones were rolling in his grave. They were never at peace. Until Moshe Rabbeinu came and interceded on his behalf. Amar Lafanav, Moshe said to God, Ribayna Shalayla, Master of the world, Migar LeRuven Sheyoda Yehuda, Yehuda, who encouraged Reuven to admit to the sin of either moving around Yaakov's bed, or it was rather that he slept with Bilhah, however you understand that. But once Yehuda admitted to his affair with Tamar, that's what gave Yehuda the bravery to admit his sin that he committed. And so the question is, Reuven gets let off the hook. Vizos Yehuda, but Yehuda has to suffer torment for all eternity. So Shama Hashem call Yehuda. So when he said this, Shama Hashem call Yehuda all Evarei L'Shafa. So then Hashem allowed the bones to rejoin themselves in the joints, but still Lo Havakam Ma'ayele L'Mesifta Derakia. he still wasn't able to ascend to the academy in the heavens. So then Moshe Rabbeinu said, no, that's not enough. Bring Yehuda to his people. So Yehuda, because of this prayer, he was able to enter the Mesivta Durakia. But wait, once he got there, though, he wasn't able to participate in the Shakavataria and the conversations with all the rabbis there. We spent time on this in our Shara Gmul class back in the day on Thursday mornings. We're talking about like what the afterlife looks like in different rabbinic conceptions. So I always like to point out how I was always told in school that that heaven and hell are the same place. It's a base medrash. The people who get rewarded enjoy learning in a base medrash. People being punished don't enjoy learning in there. So it wasn't just my yeshivish high schooler Rebbe making it up. They may have embellished it a little bit, but we see this idea that the rabbinic conception of the afterlife is that there's this great academy where the greater you are, the more you get to participate in the discussions of Torah in the afterlife. So Yehuda was only there as a spectator. He wasn't able to participate. So then Moshe said, Yodav Rav Lo, let him be able to fend for himself. So Lo Ava Yoda Lefruke Kushya. So now Yehuda was able to offer suggestions in Shir, but he wasn't able to offer answers. He wasn't able to offer answers to questions that were posed to him. So then Moshe said, that God should be for him and able to help him in his against his enemies, not literal enemies, but in the Melchamtel Shel Torah, in the war of Torah. So then God, after this prayer, reinstated Yehuda's full rights as a righteous person. He was able to participate in all of the discussions that were going on in the Mesivta Durakia and the Heavenly Academy, and he lived happily ever after and finished Shas a million times over. So what we learn from here is that Yehuda was originally, he made a Nidoy al Tanai, he excommunicated himself on a certain condition, and because of that, he suffered the ramifications of that. Okay, we have 4 minutes left, so I wanted to quickly go to the Rav Silberstein thing. We're not going to really get into the answer so much tonight. We'll briefly touch on it, but did anyone figure out where the question from Rav Silberstein connects to the Gemara that we learned? Remember, the question was, can I give tefillin to someone knowing that the tefillin will be used for a mitzvah short term? For long term, I'll have to destroy the tefillin so that no one else contracts the contagion.
Yeah, it's the story with David HaMelech and the
say more. You're saying good, say better, as they say.
Sorry?
Yeah. So what about David HaMelech? What's the connection?
Well, the name of Hashem was on the.
Very good. Phyllis got it. So Phyllis saying this is the connection, because there the question was, can I throw the shard into the water if it's going to erase the name of God? So there's that similar question over here. Can I give the tefillin to this person who is sick, knowing I'll have to destroy the tefillin which has the name of God later on? So perhaps this Gemara could be a proof that one would be able to give the tefillin. It's Ramosha Feinstein, I think, said that you do not. Rav Elyashiv said you can. It's on the Chashukei Chemed piece there. But then a suggestion was, what if you don't burn it? What if you just put it in the water? And you're not actively destroying the name of God, but eventually the water will erase it. So what's that? It's a grama. It's an indirect action. So it's a question, is that really an indirect action if it's for sure going to eventually dissipate and erase in the water? So one suggestion in there is that you didn't write the name of God so that you could destroy it. Here, you're the tefillin, you're giving him the tefillin, but you're not trying to actively destroy it. It happens to be you have to do that later on. So there's a lot of considerations in there, and maybe we'll save it for next time. I just wanted to show you how that interesting halacha l'maisa question can be very much rooted in this story that we saw here in the Gemara. So don't underestimate any, not that we are, but never underestimate anything that we're learning in the Gemara here. These kind of stories can actually serve as precedent for very important pressing halachic questions like this one that we just learned. So that brings us to the end of our learning for tonight. We are, I guess we have one little piece right before the Mishnah that Goblin will start with next time on Yud Aleph Amud Beis on 11b. We're in the double digits. Even in the Hebrew, we're in the double digits. Yud Aleph. So we are making progress. We should feel good about that. We are making significant progress.
Did we actually answer the question, though, that all of the stuff we've been studying for the last 20 minutes was supposed to answer, though?
What question?
Wasn't the question, wasn't it supposed to be that if the people don't pray for the high priests, if they don't pray for the high priest to die, would the high priest die? What could the high priest have done to prevent the unintentional murder? And then they go into this whole, it's like, what's the answer to this?
Okay, so the this is like a new section of the Gemara. It's segued into there. I probably should have compartmentalized a little bit better. So this part doesn't really address the Kohen Gadol per se. This gets into like a little bit of a new topic. The answer for the Kohen Gadol is that the Kohen Gadol was expected to pray on behalf of these people. He did not do so. Therefore, he is held accountable for that. So
Wait, so we're not, like, we don't come back to this ever?
Not as far as I know. That's kind of the conclusion of that part of the Gemara.
Okay. Because I feel like it talked about that, and then it went into this other question. And then in the same paragraph, it says, here in Babylonia, we have an adage to describe this situation. And then they go into other stuff.
Right.
It just felt like they were going to come back to it and answer it. But they didn't. Okay. I was just clarifying.
They provided their answers. And I think we have some questions on that answer. But perhaps we could go more in depth at another point. But we are at 9:30. So thank you all for coming. Wishing you all a wonderful Shabbos. For those who are able to make it in person, I look forward to seeing you all for davening and for the scrumptious Kiddush that Toby promised us. And God willing.
What is this, on Shabbos?
What was that?
The scrumptious Kiddush is on
We've
Shabbos?
been having Kiddush every week now for a few weeks
Yep.
with the tuna and egg salad and hummus and Israeli salad and fruit.
Did you,
and
You
did you
get
buy
Tasha, it's in the
did you buy
morning.
the forks, Toby? Did you bring the forks?
we
Did
got
you
the
get
forks individually wrapped.
We
forks.
got forks, people. Come to shul. We got plastic forks for you.
Yeah.
Plastic forks.
We no longer have to wear masks. We no longer have to social distance, but we've got individually wrapped forks. There you go.
Is that
What world
true?
we live in.
No masks or social distancing?
Well, that's what the
Outside,
CDC announced
not
today.
Outside, okay.
No,
Not
no,
in the
no,
Apple's-
no.
Apple's mask.
No. The CDC said if you're vaccinated,
Oh,
inside as well. That's the new thing. It's all over the news.
wait. So
Yep.
we're not wearing masks in shul this Shabbos?
We haven't changed any shul policies yet. This just came out
The
a
10th
few
we are.
hours ago.
The next Shabbos and the 10th, we're not having masks anymore.
Right, but according to the CDC, as of like 3 or 4 o'clock this afternoon, if you're vaccinated, you don't have to wear masks inside and you don't have to social distance.
All right, I'm looking forward to the next board.
But we
meeting.
haven't
This is
changed
fun.
any shul policies yet. We have to, like stop and think for a minute and see how, like what do you do about the fact that not everybody's, vaccinated? They have to keep wearing masks. If you're not wearing, if you're not vaccinated, you've got to be masked.
I
But
don't
if
think
you
I've said
don't-
this
but if
before, but
you're
I'm excited for next
vaccinated,
board
you should-
meeting.
But if you don't want to wear a mask and you're vaccinated, you shouldn't be forced to wear a mask.
You don't, right, correct.
Okay.
According to the CDC, but we're waiting to see also what the state says, it's like, because the CDC hedged what it says by saying if states have different rules, you have to follow your state's rule. Now, so far, Connecticut has been very liberal, and they had already announced that after May 19th, there would be no more restrictions, but nobody quite knew what that meant. So hang in for a few more days, but we're,
In process.
we're almost,
See, you
Yeah,
look
we're
bad.
almost-
You come
almost
to the
there.
Gemara here, you get exclusive news from the shul. All right, good stuff. All right, everyone, have a
Just
Thank
turn
you
wonderful
so
night.
much.
on the
Shabbat
TV,
shalom.
it's all
Have a
they're-
good Shabbos.
It's all they're talking about.
Very good
Good
job.
Shabbos,